you tend to take a great deal for granted because you feel like you're going to live forever, and it's only if you lose a friend or maybe if you have a near-death experience, suddenly things are sharply brought into focus, and many events in your life and people in your life and activities that you normally think of as being trivial, you know, suddenly attain this real significance when you take into account the fact that, my God, that could have been the last time I would ever see that person.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Saved for More. I am Luke Goodish as always, and today I have a very special video for you, a video that means a lot to me. It's very important to me, and I really hope you stick around and watch the whole thing. I'm going to be doing the second in a series that I started back a few months ago with an Ernest Hemingway video where I talk about those icons who inspire me, these figures I look up to, and I give some reasons as to why they're so impactful in my life and some of the lessons that you can take and ponder. I think that this man's story and some of the lessons that his life and death provided, I think they can cause pause for anyone and have you really just examining and reflecting on where you are and where you want to be. I have to shout out Viking Samurai. He did a video on this individual that I will link in the description. This video was one of the first times that I got to really see deeply into the life of this individual. And that video was that for me. It made me pause, it made me reflect, it made me think about where I was, where I'm going, and recalibrate. So thank you, Viking Samurai, for introducing me to the deeper life and story of Brandon Lee. So as you could tell from the title and the thumbnail, Brandon Lee is the subject of this video. Now, the Viking Samurai video wasn't my introduction to Brandon Lee. I've actually always admired and looked up to him for other reasons. The Viking Samurai thing just gave me another angle to look at Brandon Lee from, and it sort of deepened and re-solidified my love for the man and the icon. I first found out about Brandon from The Crow, that movie from the 90s where he was tragically killed on the set of that film. And that's just one of the most tragic things of all time, because that, I think The Crow is when he was finally breaking out of the shadow of his father, and he was making that name for himself, making his own legacy, and that, I think that would have shot him into the stratosphere and made him an A-lister. I know that me personally, I didn't know that was Bruce Lee's kid when I first watched The Crow in high school. Um, so to me, Brandon Lee was The Crow, not just Bruce Lee's son. And that's something that was very important to him. He never wanted to be known as just Bruce Lee's kid. That was one of the first connections I had with him when I was watching The Crow, and I looked up the actors. I always like look up who's who and things like that, and I found out the story that he was Bruce Lee's kid, and that was my first connection. I've talked about it here before, and maybe I can do a video going deeper if I haven't explained this thoroughly enough, and if you guys think you could benefit from it. But a large portion of my problem back in high school and before was my identity as a man, due to me comparing myself to my father. I was always metaphorically running alongside the ghost of my father, the legacy that he has. Where I grew up, my dad, in this small town, he was just well known. And everyone who met me in this small town or would find out my name and my last name, they would always say, "Oh, are you Lee's kid?" I was always Lee's son. So times that feeling that I had, times 8 billion, and then you're Brandon Lee, you're Bruce Lee's kid. I could not imagine the pressure, the stress, and the feelings that Brandon Lee must have had being Bruce Lee's kid. Whether it is a father for you or a family legacy or this or that, the world is going to try to define you in some way. The world loves to squeeze you into a box and tell you that you're this. They try to do that with Brandon. They wanted him to be, "Oh, you're Bruce Lee's son, do the kung fu movies, throw kicks, be the action guy." And Brandon was so much more. Brandon wanted to be so much more. He was his own man. So this struggle of finding who you are, that's why I titled this video Becoming You. To me, Brandon Lee epitomizes finding your own personal identity. He epitomizes and symbolizes carving yourself out of the stone. We all have to get brave, stand up, and try to step out of the shadow of the world. We have to step out of the shadow of the identity that people are trying to place on us. You have to step away from who people say you are And that's what I respected and loved about Brandon Lee from the start. He has this quote. He says, "I respect my father very much, but him and I are very different men." This is what I had to learn. This was the legacy that held me down. This was the shadow that darkened my days back in high school. This is what took therapy and good friends and a lot of introspection and a lot of reading to break out of for me, was the idea that I had to be this one type of man. And I actually recently did a flashback to my first ever Instagram post. Follow me on Instagram at saved_for_more. I did my flashback to my first ever Instagram post and I talked about this because this was the first lesson that really changed things for me psychologically. I didn't think that I was so useless after this one. My father was this type of man, right? This is him. This is what he's good at. This is his experience. These are his attributes. And this is me. I have my own attributes, my own skill sets, my own interests. And I was trying to fit myself into his life. I was trying to fit myself into the identity that he has. That's not how it works. That's just trying to fit a square into a round peg. It's not gonna work out. Brandon Lee said you cannot live trying to live up to somebody else's opinion of what your father was like. This might not be the legacy of a father you're running against, but the world is trying to tell you something. They're trying to say, hey, this is you. You do this. The world is always trying to define you and squeeze you into a corner. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. We pressure ourselves into saying we have to be this and do this. And we limit ourselves and define ourselves against something. Oh, we cannot do that. That's unrealistic. We cannot do that. That doesn't happen for people. We try to just push ourselves into these boxes so that we become, for whatever reason, so we become more likable or become more marketable or become somebody who we think can get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. We limit ourselves and define ourselves in these situations. And Brandon Lee said, no, I'm not doing that. That's why I loved The Crow. The fact that that was Bruce Lee's kid going off and doing something so very different. Yeah, it had some martial arts in it and some fighting, but it was an artistic piece. It had costumes and makeup. It was something very unique. And I think he was going to get even more and more unique after that. And he always said he wanted to be like Mel Gibson, able to do Lethal Weapon and then jump over and do something like Hamlet or What Women Want. He could jump all around. He's got more in him. I believe that The Crow was a very strategic choice on Brandon's part. I think he knew that it was different. The idea of legacy and what you left behind, that was very important to Brandon from what I can tell. So he spoke a lot about legacy, leaving your mark, what's going to be left behind, what people are going to say. He talked a lot about that. Furthermore, we're all shaped in the context of our time here on the earth. So his father's death when he was, I believe, 8 years old, that had an impact on him. That had a substantial impact on him, and it shaped his mental state. It shaped his paradigm for seeing this world, and it caused him to be quite existential. He lived very close to death. This is something I learned from the Viking Samurai video. Brad Pitt actually tells a story about Brandon Lee. Him and Brandon were out, drinking, smoking, partying out in California one night, and he said that Brandon Lee drove a hearse. He also said that when they were getting, token and drinking, they got to talking, and Brandon said that he feared dying young like his father. This was another big connection for me. I was born with less than a 1% chance of survival, two open heart surgeries. You know the story about a year ago where I got clots in my heart, lung, and legs. I've always lived very close to death as well. There's this fascination or fixation and just closeness, best way to say it, to death. Him and I share that. That's why I have another connection with him that makes me respect and look up to him and admire how he handled that. And it reaffirms to me that living close to death is one of the best things that you can do. People are afraid to talk about these types of things. Nobody wants to die young, right? That's awful. Death is a terrible thing, but it's inevitable. So why in the world would we deny it? Why in the world would we try to hide from that? We can actually use it as one of the greatest igniters of our fire. To know that tomorrow could be it should tell you that today is the day to start. People are always pushing things till tomorrow. Every diet, every hard word said to a loved one, every business idea, every novel, everything is pushed to this tomorrow that never happens. But when you realize and face the fact that you could die at any minute, you start to move a little bit faster. You start to move with a little more hurry in your step. I've seen it. That's what happened to me. That's why at 2020, I promised my friend Dom I'm going to get a full draft of my boxing story out and done. I'm sick of just, saying, oh, I want to write it. I'm working on it. Yeah, I had to do it because of the clots. I almost died. And I was like, well, that would have been trapped in my grave with me. What will you leave trapped in your grave if you do not start now? You ask yourself that. You picture your gravestone and realize that under that dirt, in that casket with you, will be that idea. It will be that novel. It'll be that business. It'll be those words. That will stay there if you do not get it out. Our time is not unlimited. This brings me to another quote from Brandon, a quote that one proves he had this fixation with death, but two, this is like the biggest lesson and the thing that hit me the hardest. This was the moment in the Viking Samurai video that hit the pause button on life and made me recalibrate. I'm going to play this clip. This is the quote that Brandon Lee chose to have on his wedding invitation. And as evidence of life's brevity and life's unpredictable nature, this quote ended up just being the quote on his headstone rather than the wedding invitation.
There's this wonderful quote from the book Sheltering Sky, where he says, because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
Brandon Lee's life inspires me to remember who I am. It reminds me that I'm my own man with my own legacy to write. It reminds me that I have to push back and define myself against this world. I have to step out of the shadows of what everyone says I'm going to be or who I am. And his death, that taught me that I do not have time to waste. We don't have forever. We don't have forever to turn things around. We don't have forever to try that out. We don't have forever to say what we need to say to that person. We don't have forever to quit that job and go after what we were really passionate about. We don't have forever.